something that can be put on our YouTube channel. And as always, don't hesitate to use the raise hand and chat functions. And, and you're welcome to use your camera. And always like to see everybody. So anyhow, with that all said, let's take a quick look at the agenda. It's pretty full. And Kelly said we need to be done at 7:30 today, so I'll try to keep us on track. But we're, like I say, very full agenda, and we'll do our best. So let's jump on to the next slide, please. And here's where we have an opportunity to, for any of our new members who haven't been on these calls before, to introduce themselves. And we've got actually 5 new members, and we have another who just submitted an application, or registration, I should say, and that's in process right now. We just got that yesterday. So in no particular order, other than what's on the screen, if Stacy Taylor from Holly, if you're here, if you wanted to say hello to the group and quickly introduce yourself.
Hi, how are you? Am my volume okay?
Yes, it is.
Awesome. Yep, I'm Stacy Taylor. I live on Falk Road, a little dirt road in Holly. We're just north of the Falk Road landfill. Recently, it's been tested to some degree, and PFAS are a factor. We've been pretty active in Ann Arbor and Lansing in January doing events. We've been doing our very best to see if we can resolve our situation here on this little dirt road.
Welcome to the group, Stacy.
Thank you.
And Mary Blanchard, are you on? Mary had a chance to join tonight. I do not see her on there, but if she does join later, we'll give her an opportunity to say hello as well. How about Justin?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I'm Justin Patak. I'm a resident of Wyandotte and also the superintendent of the water department. So we have the BASF Northworks site in our city, and our intake for the water department is in the Detroit River, which is just downstream of the BASF site. So just here to try to learn and see what's coming down the pipeline.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining.
Thank you.
You bet. And next on our list here is Rick Radisky. Rick.
Good evening. I'm Rick Radisky. I'm a long time, I guess as far as PFAS is concerned, which is relatively new, but I'm a long time advocate for PFAS investigations and cleanups, primarily in the Rockford area, but I live in Ottawa County, and the 120th Avenue site is fairly near to where I live. So,
thanks for joining, Rick. Appreciate you. All right, and lastly on the list here is Laura.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. It's Laura Ogar. I'm a resident of Bay City. I actually work for the County of Bay as the Director of Environmental Affairs and Community Development. And as such, I've been working on Saginaw Bay, Saginaw River legacy issues for the past 19 years, some of the environmental contamination, mostly focusing on restoration activities. I work closely with Mike Jury, and I've asked him for updates frequently for the PFAS, so I figured it was time to join up on the citizens group. I do get calls frequently from landowners along the Saginaw Bay shoreline about the foam. They're always interested in the foam, and so I just figured this would be a better opportunity for me to stay informed. So thank you very much.
You bet. Thanks for joining, Laura. All right, and I don't know, I couldn't tell if Mary had a chance to join yet. I did not see her in the list here. All right, well, let's go on to prior meeting recap and the meeting we had. It seems like just a month ago, right? We had some really good dialogue, and just, quick recap of that. We had watershed presentations, Southeast Michigan, basically at the request of several of you to try to put in context or in perspective a lot of the sampling activity that's going on down there, and kind of basically a dry run for something we intend on providing a municipal briefing for everybody in the watershed in the next month or so. So we appreciated that. We also did that demonstration for Kalamazoo County on a project that John Esch has been spearheading, and we've been working with AJ and others to try to come up with information that can help residential well owners understand whether or not they could potentially be impacted by PFAS contamination and what they could do about it, and what the results might mean if they actually initiate testing of their own well. And as well as we had an update from Mike Jury on surface water foam and the report that came out on that. So really good dialogue with those. It doesn't look like much up there, but it took us a little over an hour and a half to get through it. So appreciated everybody's active participation in that. And I believe, Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong, is the recordings are for both December and January are now available on the COG page, if anybody missed that meeting or just wants to catch up. All right. So I think at this point in time, we're going to jump right into the agenda, and we're really pleased today to introduce Laureen Allen. I had the pleasure of being on a panel with Laureen, I think, oh my gosh, it may be 2 or 3 months ago, talking about PFAS, and which kind of, at the same point in time, Dave Wynn, one of our members here of the Citizens Advisory Work Groups, suggested that we reach out to other states and find out what's going on there. So 2 and 2 together, we've got Laureen here with us, and I really appreciate her joining. And so if you don't mind, just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what's going on from your perspective as a resident impacted with PFAS contamination, and any words of wisdom you might have for us. And we're looking forward to some dialogue and some Q&A, so to speak. So Maureen, the floor is yours.
Hi, good night. My name is Laureen Allen. I live in Merrimack, New Hampshire. So residents in my community found out in March of 2016 that we were impacted by PFAS contamination, ongoing groundwater contamination in a minimum of 65-mile area. So it's a pretty significant site. The source is an industrial polluter. So New Hampshire, by 2017, had done a remarkable job using GIS mapping. And the folks in Michigan and your State Department, I know, did a lot of talking with them and then started incorporating that also. So the GIS mapping was the beginning of the state really saying, like, we need to get a handle on, what's going on in this area and then other areas of the state. And as all of you have known, when you enter into this journey, you don't get the answers you want as a community member. You're stunned to find out that you've been exposed for a long time. It's kind of a lot to get your head around. And everybody in the community has needs, and they need guidance, and they need, so much information. They need to know that the exposure will stop. They need to know what this means to them. Then there's the cost of remediation and cleanup, and the lack of regulations, as you all know, on the state level. The federal guidance hasn't been there historically, and on and on and on it goes. So, when you form a community group, as I did with other residents in my community, you need to get out there. As some of the folks on this call are probably well aware, I know some of your Michiganders quite well, who've done a great job. We've worked together in the National PFAS Contamination Coalition, advocating for our federal needs, because our states need not just resources, but we need the feds to kind of step up. We can't do this all ourselves. So as all of you know, the more you get information, the more bogged down you get. That initial stage is very, very overwhelming, not just what this means to you and yourself, your families, your neighbors, your children, but, as you find out what's lacking and what isn't there, there's this sense of outrage that comes in. So in New Hampshire, we went through this process where everybody is turning to the state in particular to, quote, do their job, right? So there's what I call kind of, the storming stage, right? And I am a clinical social worker, just so you know that in my real job. And back in the day, I did a lot of group work and a lot of community needs assessment work. So when we look at group work, we look at stages, and the first stage of group work is in fact called storming. So, people want to know, what you're doing about this and, all the other stuff, because it's very emotional. It's this sense of injustice, this sense of how could this happen in this day and age? It just doesn't make sense to all of you, and losses and impacts, and the stories are just so terrible to hear. So then we have our state leaders who, of course, they don't want to, want this to happen. And they're listening to all the people who are emotional and stirred up, and they're trying to be supportive, but they're also trying to figure out how they're going to create this system that's going to address the needs of the citizens without the guidance. In 2016 and 17, there was little to no guidance there, for our states. So the states have to create some sort of a response plan, right? And realize that they need to do this. And this is a national crisis. So we've all been on this journey, for way too long. It's tiring, it's exhausting. And part of the things that we've learned here in New Hampshire are that this issue of collaboration, and people who know me know I'm very, very big on collaboration. I've met many of the Michigan folks in various administrative positions several times over the years, including about a year ago with the CDC, looking at working on some guidance for stress management for communities was a project they were doing. And the MPART site came to my attention quite some time ago, because what we all do is we say, what are other states doing about this? What could we do better? We know what our needs are in communities, and we want them, by golly, yesterday, if not 5 or 6 years ago, in the case of many, many communities. So we look across the nation. I do that quite frequently, because I'm really that person in my state who says, hey, you're doing a good job on this, but Michigan's doing this, Pennsylvania's doing this, Maine's doing that, Vermont's doing that. So I send them this information and push, because it's really, really important that we learn from each other, and we need so much more. So what the state of New Hampshire realized in the beginning is, they are typically doing their job up at the DEQs and Department of Health and Human Services, and they are not having this level of interaction with people, especially people who are angry and upset and want this problem fixed. So the dynamics have been challenging. They have smoothed out. In the beginning, they were very, very difficult. And I kind of played that role, to kind of mediate almost between the state and my community, as I was doing what I was doing to help people learn as much as they could about this. So what we saw is, as many of you know, residents, in the absence of good direction, go out there in research on their own. They find other residents across the nation, they share information, they find science and environmental allies, and sooner or later they are armed with all this knowledge. And this phrase that we use in the National Coalition, they not only want, but they demand a seat on the table, because what they're noticing is local officials and municipalities and people that we turn to for answers, what are you going to do about this? They're learning on the job, right? A lot of elected officials in our towns are residents. They aren't experts on PFAS. A lot of people on the state level have become informed and experts on PFAS, but when this started, they were not experts on PFAS. So you have all these residents that have all kinds of information, kind of throwing it at some of the state officials who are thinking maybe they're up to speed and maybe they're not, and it's this crazy process in the beginning. Now we see a lot more information that people have. It's a little more equalized, but as you all know, the needs of communities are immense, right? And states have to start with a plan. The MPART website is excellent. There's nothing like it anywhere. And I'm so impressed by it. And when it launched, I looked at this and I said, wow, they've taken every single thing and put it under the same umbrella with this great flow chart. And I met Steve somewhere, I don't know. I've met many, many people through the years. And before the call in December, I think we met, who knows when it was. But, I really have tooted this website to a lot of folks, including in New Hampshire, hasn't really got me anywhere here because they don't have the resources to do tech in this way, but we do meet in other capacities. So that being said, I'm not naive. A great website and a great foundation and a plan forward is fabulous, but I know you still have the same dynamics that we have and we have had and we will continue to have, regardless of this great structure. The feelings are still there. The impatience is still there. And this, what are you going to do about it? And it feels like too little too late, even though some great progress is being made. So one of the things I would advise is, when I looked at, your agendas in some of your meetings in the past, keep in mind that you're in this fluid process and we're all people. So the dynamics are there. They do evolve. So agenda shaping is the first thing that I would kind of look at here, because here in New Hampshire, what we've done is, in the beginning, we're a smaller state, and we put ourselves right into the agenda shaping role with the state. So they were kind of, what do we do with these people? I mean, they love us, we love them now, but in the beginning, that wasn't something that people have done. They have careers and jobs, and we're doing this on the side of careers and jobs in life. So there we are, basically elevating ourselves, right? Promoting ourselves to this almost equal position of folks who do this for a living. So it became a little bit of an adjustment for all of us. I will say I'm very glad to announce that at this point, everyone has the utmost respect for each other. And what somebody brings up as a resident versus a person who's hired by the state, right now, we all basically get equal billing. We share information and it's going quite well. There's many, many things that still have to be done. But for example, our MCL process, when New Hampshire committed to this process, we said, well, we want to be part of it. And they said, great, you can give public comments. We always have public comments. And we said, no, we want to be part of the process from the very, very beginning. So we started this series of meetings where it was very transparent. It was explained to us exactly how they go about this process, what they choose for critical endpoints, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So throughout that process, New Hampshire concluded originally that their recommendations for MCLs were based on the most rigorous science. They had this whole presentation of how this was. And residents were so informed at that point that many of us said, hold on a second, we disagree with your critical endpoints for PFOA in particular. And here's more research, we'll give it to you. We've been giving you information and soliciting public comments from scientists. And part of our involvement from the start resulted in the initial recommendation of 38 PPT for PFOA being reduced to 12 parts and collaborating on science. And really part of that came from looking at what other states were doing and what they based those decisions on. So a lot of residents, such as myself, we share information continually. We have calls with each other, and we really do know our stuff. So I would suggest that, be patient with the people end of things, all of you with each other. It's really hard. And that doesn't mean it's going to take time, right? That phrase, these things takes time. You don't want to say that to residents. They don't like it, but be part of the agenda shaping. Involve your impacted community members into your agenda shaping outside of this monthly meeting. Reach out to them and collaboratively shape the agenda. That would be my number one suggestion for you. And I'm going to stop right there and see if there's any questions, because any of us who talk on this topic, we could talk a real long time if you let us. So zip.
It looks like we've got Tony.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me, everyone?
Yep.
Okay. I just want to say first, I want to welcome Maureen, my friend and colleague from the National PFAS Contamination Coalition. It's so great to see you and hear you here with all of our friends here in Michigan. And just a shout out to Laureen for the fabulous work that she's done. And I just want to really hone in on, Laureen, on the point you made about agenda shaping. I think that it's really, really critical. And I feel, and I know a lot of times we have these discussions in the coalition among communities across the country, very similar reactions across the board. And I think that this whole thing about agenda shaping and involving residents at the earliest stages, that's been something I've been kind of beating the drum for a long time. I mean, you're the professional when it comes to social work and human interaction, but I just think it helps to create a more trusting and collaborative relationship. And I'm wondering, Laureen, if you could just maybe talk a little more about that, because I see that a lot.
That's crucial. This trust, and people who work in government know this, right? Across the nation, not just in Michigan, there's a lot of distrust. People can get really paranoid, not just the leaders, but everybody, on the ground. So it isn't just trust, it's the wealth of knowledge. I know, Tony, that you have immense knowledge in this area and mad crazy skills. So just because your day job isn't working in this area, this, that you and others have accumulated just a wealth of resources, and how to connect people, and where those allies and resources are. So the state needs to utilize that. We're a wealth of information, and you also need buy-in from people. Your plan as a state is only as good as your residents will trust and believe in. So you need those community leaders who are trusted by their communities to get buy-in for any plans that you have going forward.
Any other questions? Looked like Connie was trying to say something there.
No,
All right.
Looks
Well,
like,
if we don't have any more questions, Laureen, please continue. Oh, wait, I see a hand came up.
looks like AJ.
Yeah, AJ.
Yes, I just wanted to thank you and all the work that everyone in New Hampshire has done. It's you folks have really been leaders as the states have been forced to kind of pick up the reins for PFAS contamination and dealing with it. So again, many thanks there. I noticed on your cover it says PFASproject.net. So are you affiliated then with Northeastern University? Because they're PFASproject.com.
There's a .com and a .net. Did we get the wrong one? I think the net is the PFAS Coalition.
It is. Yeah, no, I just wondered, since it's both called PFAS Project.
No, I think it's just, who knows. We do some, they have hosted the first PFAS national gathering, if you will, back in 2017. There was another one in 19 where they brought together residents and many, many people from science and law and state officials and everybody who should be under the same roof. Interestingly enough, there were some chemical association representatives who also were there, which kind of surprised me, but hey, why not? They have to learn how to reshape and make some changes too. So the PFABproject.net is the National Coalition's website that we collaboratively shape. It is hosted by a entity called Community Action Works. So they kind of host us, and they can help with facilitation and what we need. But the residents, Tony and myself and others are on the leadership team. So we shape the agenda, and we decide, what we're working on.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure I understood how everything works, and I've seen the community action tag on a lot of really informative emails too. So thanks so much for your continuing work.
All right. You have other questions? All right. Abby.
Hi, Laureen. Just wondering from your position, if you guys get any funding through the state of New Hampshire for some of your advocacy work, or how you get the funding to promote your PFAS work.
Oh my gosh, absolutely not. New Hampshire, for those of you who don't know, is the live free or die state. So we really depend on volunteerism. more than anything, to help run the state. You know, we have no sales tax, no income tax, run a pretty lean budget. So it's challenging. It's very challenging. You know, to do the budget every year is challenging. So they don't have the resources for that. So everything that residents have done, and thank you for noting that, we have put in immense amounts of time. I, as a matter of fact, have, over the last few years, I've realized that I often take a hit in my income for time that I take off of work sometimes for advocacy work, but I just feel really strongly that it has to be done. And I hope it's settling in a bit, you know, this year. And it's very difficult, but no, there isn't funding. Funding is an issue. We have a great federal delegation that has brought funds to many parts of PFAS, but not the advocacy work.
Thank you.
All right. Other questions? Marina, really.
Stacy Taylor.
Hi, I just wanted to say that listening to you talking, I actually have great respect, because this is kind of the walk we've been doing for 3.5 years, and your observations are pretty point on. Our dump was not, it was unknown. All records were lost on our dump, and it's a historic dump, or a early industry area in the 1800s and early 1900s here in Holly, Michigan. And man, I sure appreciate hearing the things that you're saying are pretty much spot on where we're at. We're pretty frustrated, and we are pretty armed with a lot of knowledge. And I appreciate the fact that you're leading the way on making things happen.
Hang in there, because what you find out in this community is when you start delving into this, as you know, you find more and more and more. You also find federal cleanup sites and areas in your state and in your county that you didn't even know. You knew some of them were there, but you didn't realize that so much of this has been monitored. There are ground monitoring wells all over, you know, for miles around here. And now that PFAS has been requested to be tested for, we see this showing up all over the place and other toxic chemicals. So it makes us a little more, you know, enraged about, it's the environment. You know, we only have one environment. This is the world we live in, and we know these are forever chemicals. We need to, you know, this is a national crisis. I really believe it is.
We're 20 minutes south of Flint, and per the health department, we are 100,000 people at risk for our aquifer.
Yes.
All right. Well, Laureen, thank you very much for sharing your experience. We appreciate your perspective and passion for all the good work that's going on out there, and for your leadership with the national group too. And and again, it's been a pleasure meeting you a couple of times now, and this group always benefits from all of the input we get. You're more than welcome to stay on and you know, for the rest of the conversation today. And it's a great group. We're really proud of them. And yes, as you mentioned, you know several of them here, and a few that couldn't make it tonight that said to say hi too. So, all right. Well, then let's move on to the next part, which is Abby Hendershot, to kind of bring back together the effort that's been underway both within MPART and with the Citizens Advisory Workgroup, talking about, you know, how do we move forward with, you know, making sure we're staying very transparent with information we provide out on the website, and also making sure we're devoting our resources to the highest priority things and setting the right expectations, especially out in the public, with the information we provide and the actions we're taking at site. So, Abby, I really appreciate your leadership on this, and welcome to the conversation tonight, and the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me. And so I have already worked with many of you, but for anybody who's new to the group or new to me, my name is Abby Hendershot. I live in the Rockford area and am the Grand Rapids District Supervisor for the Remediation and Redevelopment Division in the Grand Rapids District. And so I've been in the PFAS world now going on 4 years since you know, the Wolverine worldwide issue began. And so I understand what Laureen was saying about the, you know, emotion and passion, because we sat in an auditorium with 1,000 people in person and 200 more people on the live streaming. And so I felt those motions and have gone through that. So, but today I am working with our groundwater work group to redefine and refine our what becomes an MPART site. And this is going to help us on a couple of numbers of ways, because we really want to keep the transparency that we have with MPART. We want to keep that the most important sites, the ones that have the highest level of activity, are still there. So we're going to talk about, you know, some of the tweaks. I won't say they're all out changes, but some of the tweaks that we're making to the MPART site definition, talk about areas of interest, the slight changes to the website, and then, you know, just a kind of a summary of proposed changes. So next slide. So at this point, in keeping with what our MPART sites are currently, we're still going to use a groundwater sample, which are exceeding for PFAS of our Part 201 applicable groundwater cleanup criteria. So it's going to have to exceed one of the 7 criteria that we have for groundwater for PFAS. But we also want that sample to make sure that it's been confirmed. We want to make sure that it was analyzed by a good lab. We want to make sure it's a, you know, a reputable lab. And so, but the third thing, and the thing that's going to make it a little bit different than what we've had before, is that we want to really make those sites the ones that are actual sources of PFAS. And so if the property or location is something that we know or suspect to be, have a high suspicion to be the location or origin of a PFAS release, those are the ones we want to put on as MPART sites. And so those are going to be 3 things that really have to be there in order to make it onto the MPART site. So next slide. So a tier 1, and originally we were talking about making this like a high activity tier 1 site, but just for simplification, we just are going to call it a tier 1 site, are those where we've got follow-up assessment is being conducted, because we know we've got a source we highly suspect, and we know there's a need for remedial actions, probably because we have receptors that are potentially at risk, either residential wells that have been sampled or are in the process of being sampled. We think we might have public infrastructure and drinking water supply wells that are at risk. We may have fishing or recreation or, you know, potential issues to surface water. Those are all things that we are strongly going to put into this tier 1 MPART site, because those are things that need investigation. And when you have a higher level of risk, we want to be able to put those up and thing. So in this particular case, for websites, those would use the current format that we currently have on the MPART website, but we would update them probably quarterly, so that staff aren't having to get in there. They could do them as needed if they have updates more frequently, but at least quarterly, to keep the sites fresh and to keep the data up to date, so that you know, the outside and our residents can keep track of it. Next slide. A tier 2 site would be something where you have follow-up work that's being done, but the receptors have been sampled, and maybe we've given them point of use filters, so that they have interim measures for protection, so that while the investigation is going on and a long-term remedy is found, we have those measures in place. So it can take a little bit longer. We have a little bit more time to do the investigation. It could also be a site that's being downgraded from a tier 1 to a tier 2 because of exactly that. We've gotten everybody sampled. Everybody who's affected or potentially affected has been sampled and has some sort of a interim remedy for point of use filter. And it could be, like in this particular case, a lot of our landfill sites where the site's already well defined. We know where the contamination is, but there's routine monitoring that goes on. And that's information that if you've got, like Stacy Taylor was talking about, if you've got residential wells that are being sampled as part of that routine monitoring, that'll be in the tier 2 because we want to make sure we keep track of that information and that's available for our residents to see. That again, those tier 2 MPART sites would again get the full write-up, but probably be updated as needed, but at least every 6 months, so that quarterly data or that biannual data can get out there and be refreshed. Next slide. So a tier 3 site is going to be one where we really are awaiting additional assessment or funding. Maybe we don't have staff to handle it, but we think, at least first glance, looks like there's no known receptors. So this is going to be a site where we're kind of pushing off to the side. We don't think that we found some PFAS in an area where we've already got municipal water, so we don't think we've got any true drinking water receptors, and where we've got sites where we've got a liable party. Maybe they're not doing any work, but they're supposed to be doing the work, and we have to go through the steps to get them to enforce and to bring them back into compliance. We do have sites where we don't have a liable party. And then others, if we just don't have state resources available to further evaluate that particular site, those would all go in this tier 3 MPART site category. And so on this particular case, this would be part of a website list, which we'll show you here in a few slides, but wouldn't have a full background. You would get a few basic information, site address, location, but you're not going to, and then you would have a project manager's name if you needed to contact someone about it. Next slide. And then tier 4 is one where we've got either investigations complete or no additional actions are anticipated. All your exposures are controlled, or it's a miscellaneous detection of PFAS that is not a big deal in the great scheme of things. No receptors, that kind of stuff. So again, tier 4s are just going to have a basic information, which we will show you here in a few seconds on what that looks like. So let's go to the next slide. And so if it doesn't meet, if we get some PFAS data in, but it doesn't meet that, that usually it's not going to meet that source area qualification. But we're doing investigation because we think there's a potential for PFAS contamination to be affecting residential wells. And we have one or more samples which may or may not exceed Part 201 cleanup criteria, but they're really unexplained, and we really need to know what the issue is. But the sample location is not does not appear to be the source of the PFAS contamination. And usually in those kinds of situations, we do have significant public interest. And so you could have any combination of these 4 things going on for it to be nominated as an area of interest so that we can continue to bring it forward. And so those are, we've got several areas like this around the state already. And usually they're associated with bigger sites that we think are the source, but we're still trying to define that groundwater contamination to make sure we understand the full definition of it. Next slide. So this is where we're at for a combined conceptual proposal. We've talked with, had many internal group discussions as well as external group. We've met with the COG subcommittee on getting some additional input, looking at, and actually the tiers I think came from your group as far as, combining them down. And so what we'll have is like I went through, we'll have the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and 4, as well as the areas of interest. And this is going to kind of show you how they're all going to fall out, as well as how often they'll be updated for the website, what kind of website information will be there, and then the description. So as I said, tier 1s are going to be our high activity, high public interest, or really suspect you've got human exposure, your investigation's ongoing. Tier 2 is going to be your lower activity, maybe lower public interest, but you've got your human exposure is controlled. we've got point of use or we've got something going on to protect people, but the investigation's still going on and there's going to be periodic monitoring to better understand it. Tier 3 is incomplete, inactive, awaiting additional resources. And first, look at it, does not show us any human exposure, and we may not have any responsible parties for that one. So Tier 4 will be our inactive, investigations are complete, and no additional actions are anticipated. So in areas of interest, we just went through. So let's go on to the next one and show you. Next slide for us, Kelly. There we go. So right now, when you pull up the MPART website, you get this list of all the MPART sites. Now, the one thing that we are going to do differently that I didn't put on the slide is we're going to take the areas of interest in the MPART sites, put them all on one list so you can find them all, so it's all combined, because I think that's been a little confusing for people to have to try to find them. And so you'll see these revisions to the columns. I don't think anyone really cares what the military or longitude or latitude is for when they're searching for the site next to their home. So what they're going to want to know is, is this, what tier of site is this? And we've had this residential wells investigated, yes, no, to be determined. It is a direct result of getting some input from you guys on what kinds of things you wanted to know here. But we're also going to have a drop down so you can get the site lead name, the site lead email, and their phone number. So if it is a tier 3 and all you're getting is this basic information, you can still call somebody and say, hey, can you give me an update on this? Or can I have a map to go with this one? Or my house is, a mile from this, am I at risk? That information, you'll still be able to get something from there, but it won't be that constant burden for staff to have to update when there's really no potential, there's really not much going on for them to update. So this new columns will be there as part of the new MPART rollout when we go to do that. Next slide. So the biggest changes and the biggest tweaks, I will call them, is that the MPART site itself has to be a source of PFAS. So, we're not going to make people's residential wells a MPART site because most of the time they're not going to be a source of PFAS. They may have PFAS located in their well, but they most likely did not dump PFAS on their ground or have a discharge of PFAS containing materials to their ground. We're going to use the tiers to kind of sort out the data and sort out the sites so people can say, okay, here's the top 25 sites that MPART's got, not in a priority way, but these are the ones that they're still working on actively that really are the getting the most attention right now. And so that's going to help with those. Your areas of interest page is no longer going to be separate, so you'll combine that with the PFAS site page. So if you want to export an Excel spreadsheet of all the data, you can do that as one list, which I think will help immensely. And then you're going to have additional columns on that website table of the residential investigations going on. So that would be a yes, no, or to be determined, and adding the site lead name and contact information. Next slide. One of the biggest reasons that we did this is because, Kelly and Amy are 2 people and Steve is 3 that really run all of MPART. And so staff all have many, many duties and many, many jobs, and for them to continue to corral 70 different site leads for all of these different sites has been very difficult. And so we really want to take and reduce that burden down, not only on Steve and Amy and Kelly, but also on staff, so that they knew when to be able to update things, what was going to be most important, and still be able to maintain that transparency that everybody's come to know and love about the MPART website. But it also helps us lessen that administrative burden on doing updates. Because when we first started this, when MPART first started, it was just, you know, the Wolverine website. And then it was Wolverine and Wordsmith. And then it was Wolverine, Wordsmith, and 4 others. We could keep up to date with that stuff. We can't do that with 150 plus sites. That'll just continue to grow. So this will be a much more sustainable process for us in the future, and will help us focus on those sites that are really the highest potential risk, are going to end up in that tier 1 category, and clarifies our expectations on the frequency of the website updates. So next slide. So just so you know, even if hypothetically one of these current 154 ends up in a category 4 or category or a tier 3 or tier 4, those write-ups are all going to stay. We're not going to take any of the current write-ups down, but it will get tiered so that you can see that a site that's already on the list is going to get left as a tier 3 or a tier 4 sites. All the new sites and all the areas of interest that are going to follow will have the new process and the new format. So just know that. Right now, we're going to talk with, after we talk with you guys tonight, we're going to take it to MPART and to the MPART members, voting body for adoption. And then we will start rolling it out with staff and start the evolution process of updating the website. And, as we continue to do that, always as resources allow. And the next, is that our last slide? Other questions? So Steve, I'm going to let you jump in and see if there's anything I forgot to mention while I was running through that piece of it.
Yeah, no, Abby did a really good job. I appreciate that. And just one clarification is, and if anybody's not muted, we're getting a little bit of feedback here. But anyway, is that I don't know that we'll have to go for an official vote or a formal vote of the MPART members. What we'll do is we'll go to what we call the regular participants in MPART, and many of them are here tonight. In fact, we encourage them to be here to hear, your summary of where we are with this, and just make sure all the agencies are on board with these changes. So, but no, really good job tonight. And I think right now, let's open it up to any questions that anybody might have.
Okay. I see Bob Delaney's got his hand up.
Yep.
Bob.
Hey. Hi, Abby.
Hi, Bob. Yep.
Yeah, I remember filling out all that stuff, so I appreciate the administrative burden. One of the questions I have is, I know in like the Wordsmith area, there's a bunch of plumes that we don't know what the sources are yet. Up there, I think at least 4, maybe more. And I know at least one of them is got some relatively high contaminations, and right now they're delivering water, putting in a water main and things like that to provide water. But in the future, that wouldn't be a site. It'd be I guess it'd be an area of interest.
Yeah, if it was a site where, if it was a location where we had PFAS detected but didn't understand the source, but you had residential wells that were at risk, then, the most logical thing would be to make it an area of interest and post it that way. Yeah, just because it's not a source doesn't mean we wouldn't do anything with it. I think our resources are going to directly go to those sites that have, residents that are going to be potentially affected. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted that clarification because I personally consider that one of the sites that's really important in the state from, as far as exposure point of view, and yet it wouldn't make it into an MPART site nowadays. And so just want everybody, this question came up about Wordsmith last week, I think it was, in their public meeting. And so anyway, thanks for clarification. And I really do think you need to, in some way, communicate to people that, just because it's a site of interest doesn't mean that it's a low priority, because, people are drinking bad water figuring out where that source is pretty darn critical, and those people need to get off that water. So.
Yep, exactly. And I think, as a staff member, when we have those kinds of sites that might be adjacent to a known site or whatever, we're still going to take that unknown source site seriously as well and do everything we can. Excuse me a minute.
All right, I see. Looks like AJ, you were up next.
Yeah, as chair of the web review subcommittee, I just wanted to thank Abby and a long list of other folks from Eagle and DHHS who have been on phone calls talking through all the considerable details that went into this. I think as probably best demonstrated by that table that's there. And Bob, to your point, one of the main discussion issues is exactly that, area of interest. I mean, are we implying that's not as important because it's not been identified as a source? And I think that's one of the reasons why we wanted to, have them appear in the same place. We can distinguish between the two of them using the definitions. We've talked about, source versus non-source area. But I mean, we have, and I think it's even included in the table there, the folks out at Cascade by the Ford International Airport outside of Grand Rapids has well over 100 people impacted. And so it doesn't necessarily mean a trivial problem. So I guess the one question I would have, Abby, and we didn't really talk, we talked about the larger end of the area of interest question. What about the smaller end where we have a single residential well that has maybe come in spiked, let's just assume really high, well over 100 or even 200 parts per trillion of any of the regulated constituents which have lower amounts. How would that be handled? Just kind of the single well example, or maybe a couple of wells.
Yeah, that's a good point, AJ. Excuse me for my coughing fit here, but in a case where you come into my office and you've got a drinking water well that suddenly you've discovered you've got PFAS at a high level, but you're out in the middle of a cornfield, you don't have any other residents around you, I'm going to handle that site a little bit differently than if you're one of a very large subdivision with everybody on drinking water wells. I don't have to make you an area of interest to make sure that you get the resources you need as a resident to get some sort of remedy. So, we're constantly at the district level in contact with our local health departments to make sure residents who, are affected by whatever are getting the resources that they need. And so we would work that as a local site and not necessarily make it an area of interest, because if you've got one person that's affected, I don't know that that's the same need to have it posted to the MPART as the rest of it. It could be, but in the case of like Cascade, where we've sampled over 350 houses, there's a lot of people that would want to know that information. So I think we're going to use some of our own discretion to post those sites that are going to have the biggest significant public interest to be able to be out there. But anybody who's got some sort of a drinking water, that's kind of our mission, is to make sure and work with Department of Health and Human Services to make sure those kinds of things get taken care of.
Okay, I think that's an excellent way to handle it, Abby. I guess on one side, people don't necessarily want to be an area of interest highlighted along with 154 others as a single residence. But on the other hand, it could be the tip of an iceberg and, maybe a bigger, much bigger problem than anyone anticipates. And I think the way that you suggested, which is to find out which of those ends of the spectrum it is probably a good way, rather than automatically listing a single well as a new area of interest. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and just to put a finer point on that too, is we've talked about this in the past, is that, when it comes to residential wells, there's some sensitivities there, including, PII, where, we would not want to shine a spotlight on an individual home unless they wanted that information out there. So that's another one of the challenges when you have just one residential well result. But I really like, Abby, what you said is what we do on the web has got nothing to do with what the response is. We're not going to not respond to locations where we don't put that information out on the web right away. That the public health response is going to happen regardless of how they're categorized.
Yeah, definitely. And I see we've got a number of other hands, so
See, Bob is up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, Bob.
Can you hear me? Great.
Yep.
Abby, thank you for a great presentation. I'm from out in Brighton, Michigan, and we have the interest, your note that says it has to be the source to be in the first tier is really caught my attention.
Mm-hmm.
We have a significant number of situations where the polluter and the polluters, whoever they may be, are seeking to avoid liability and avoid being identified. And so even to the extent that you're currently involved in this massive thermophil site lawsuit that's going on, and they're still arguing 25 years later that they're not, thermophil is arguing they're not responsible. So you're walking right into the middle of a huge legal issue. And I hope that the way that you're reorganizing will not have an impact on our ability to bring polluters to the table and make them, fix what they're doing.
That's a great point, Bob. And no, the whether or not they claim to be the polluter is not really going to be. I won't say it won't be a factor, but we've got several parties on this list who claim not to be responsible, but yet there's PFAS emanating from their property. So
that's us.
Yeah. So, I mean, the data is what the data is, right? You can't argue with science. We're going to use the data. We're going to take the groundwater samples. We're going to collect all the data, look at it, and make our assessment as to what the science tells us. And
Thank you for what you do.
Yes,
my point basically is that I've been fighting this for several years. The people in my area have huge resources, including development organizations, and it's far from the citizens are far from getting justice at this point. But thank you for keeping it going, and please consider our issues.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. No, that's a very good point. And, we often start these processes with one or two data points and then work our way out. And often it will take a bit of consideration and, talking with our potentially liable parties for them to come around and say, okay, we are, or in some cases, they never admit fault, but they'll pay something to be off the hook. So, which is fine too, as long as they remedy the situation. So, all right, I see Rick's got his hand up. Mr. Radisky? Yeah, Rick, we're not hearing you. If you're
Oh, okay. Is that better?
There we go. That's better.
All right. No, I appreciate the presentation. I like the way it's organized into the tiers, and just had a kind of a general question. What determines whether information is posted on a site like the Kent County Airport? I get calls from people about sites, and the first thing I do is, go to the MPART website, and there's a lot of interest in the area of interest about, a connection between the airport and the PFAS plume and within the neighborhood, and there's no reports posted on the website. Is that something that I can get without going through FOIA, or?
Yeah, we've been discussing that internally about some of these sites that have got more interest than others about posting data. So yeah, Rick, we can talk offline and get you some
Okay.
of those resources, definitely, because we've got them set aside. But I think we just it's a tremendous amount of resources to continue to update, and we've done it on Wolverine because of, you know, there was just so many people affected and everybody wanted the data.
Yeah.
We have not done it as a routine basis for some of the other sites. And so, but that's when we were talking about actually trying to make that more available, because we do have, you know, again, quite a few homes have been affected. So.
Right. And yeah, I just wanted to also say I really appreciate seeing the information on Northeast Gravel. That information was lacking for a while, and then all of a sudden there was a big, you know, data dump of information on there, and that helps because there's a lot of questions in the neighborhoods about not necessarily in the neighborhood around the landfill that I'm aware of, but just general in the Rockford Belmont area, what's happening with that, and you know, the more information that's posted that we can see, you know, the less we'll have to bother staff.
Yeah.
So I just appreciate that. So thanks.
You're welcome. You can thank Karen for that because she put all that work in there. So.
Okay, I will. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Lynn, how are you doing? Miss McIntosh. Oh, Lynn, you're muted. Anybody else hearing her? No? Okay. Lynn, we'll give you a minute here in a second. Otherwise, let's go on to Dave Wynn.
Yeah,
Dave?
can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Can you hear me all right?
We can.
Okay.
Thank you.
I appreciate, I understand your presentation. I appreciate it. The only thing I'm going to caution you on is when it comes to respect to DOD sites, the Air Force, especially, I'm from the Wordsmith area. The Air Force is going to find any reason they can, whether it be data, whether it be material off the MPART sites or anything, so that there's something that they don't have to do when the state of Michigan backs off of them. So the only thing I'm going to caution you on is that if you take areas, the DOD sites, and you put this information and bring it down to the tier level, that could affect, the Air Force is going to take advantage of that. I'm telling you, dealt with these guys for many years, and this is going to happen. So only thing I'll do is caution you guys that you need to watch these DOD sites.
Okay, thanks, Dave, for the heads up. You know, all of these decisions will be made with not only the project manager's input, but also Steve and Amy, as well as our Attorney General's office. So if any of those concerns, if they think that downgrading something might put it at risk for not getting proper compliance by the liable party, then we would probably not downgrade it. But that's going to be a decision that'll be made on each case-by-case basis by the project team.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Lynn, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, thanks.
All right. I always go to the wrong place first, but eventually. I have a very small comment to make, but I think of the word area of interest, and that term makes me think of someplace you might visit on a vacation or something. It just has a casual sense to it. And I'm wondering if you put area of concern instead, because in a way, it is concerning when you don't know the source. And I think it's a small change, but it conveys a more seriousness in terms of how someone might perceive it. It's a small, words are important, I think sometimes. It's one thing I wanted to share, and I wanted to say to Bob, I think it's Pataki or whatever. You certainly have my empathy with once you add legal stuff in, boy, it gets hard. And just a note of empathy there. So thanks, Abby.
Okay. Thanks, Lynn. Yeah, we'll definitely we'll talk internally here and see if that would, I mean, area of concern, area of interest. I think the only thing would be is if The other areas of concern would be, confused with the federal programs, but I think it's worth discussing internally, so we can do that. Tony, it looks like you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Abby. Thanks for the presentation. A
You're
question. Yeah, a question. There are 7 PFAS compounds that we have MCLs for, and then we have the groundwater surface water regulations. But there are also, in the science panel's report, there are another, I don't know, what is it, up to 17 or something like that, other PFASs that are being tested for that aren't subject to regulation, but we're keeping an eye on them. Are those being factored into this in any way, or are we really in this just focusing on those that exceed the existing criteria?
I will give you my perspective. I don't think that, in my general sense of all the sites that I've seen in the Grand Rapids area, which is 9 counties worth of data for the last 4 years, I haven't seen a site that didn't have an exceedance of one of these compounds that showed up with a whole bunch of other stuff. I think that when we judge a site, we always look not only at individual compounds, but then we add up all the total PFAS compounds. So added up cumulatively, depending on whatever set of analyte list you might be analyzing for, whether it's the 14, the 28, and so on. We've changed it over the last couple of years, but the total PFAS really gives you a better estimation of the magnitude of the impact. And so PFOA or PFOS might be driving the bus for the enforcement and the legality of requiring some sort of action by the liable party. But when we're looking at total impacts to public health, fish and wildlife, we want to look at the total PFAS, anything we're actually analyzing for, because I think it's important to understand the holistic picture. And so we'll do that both on a quantitative as well as a qualitative sense. And so we've tried to generate both a total PFAS map as well as an individual compounds. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, actually it does. And the point you raised is that the total, you're still going to continue to post the total PFAS information along that. Yeah.
I think it's important for all investigations, because we do have some investigations that are really very, have low concentrations, but they're mostly PFOA or they're mostly one compound, but they may have some other stragglers in there. And then there's some where you have low PFOS or PFOA compounds, but the total PFAS is huge. And so you need to know what else is in there and what you're actually dealing with. And just looking at it from single compounds just doesn't give you the full picture. So
thanks,
Kelly. You're welcome. Kelly, did you have something your hand went up for a minute?
Yes. So when the criteria changed August 3rd, we actually don't combine those numbers anymore.
Right.
Separated.
So let me clarify, for a project level, we're going to consider total PFAS when we're looking at mitigation or exposure, that kind of stuff. But you're right. I'm not sure what we're doing for the website. So let me put that disclaimer out there, whether or not anything's actually given a total number for our website. But it would be data that we would have internally.
Yeah, and Abby, I think too is just, if by chance, and you said it really well, we haven't seen any of these other compounds in drinking water that are traveling alone outside of an exceedance of one of the 7 MCLs. But I think that is a perfect example. If we did find that would likely be an area of concern, working with our health partners to find out, okay, well, what is this? Because remember, the Science Advisory Workgroup gave us a screening level. It says it's not a regulatory threshold, but if you find some of these longer chain PFAS, for example, perhaps if they're above the 6 parts per trillion for PFNA, you might want to explore that a little bit more. So I think that's a really good example where we might end up with an area of interest or area of concern to explore that a little more.
just real quick too, what is actually displayed, this is AJ, on the website, I think we were told that it's not going to actually include the numbers because that would be a tremendous job to keep that up on all sites across with any new sampling data. So it'll kind of fall into the updating as indicated on the tier, but it won't necessarily be an area uniform across all sites where it reports, every PFAS that's been identified, even amongst the 7 MCLs or Part 201.
Yeah, without a true database for all of the PFAS data across the state, it would be very hard and very time intensive for our project managers to continue to post that stuff individually. So, as you know, AJ, how much data we've gotten for some of our West Michigan sites, it's beyond belief to be able to keep track of all that stuff.
And with that said, though, we do have a data management work group in MPART that is starting to evaluate how could we get to a single common platform, an enterprise database, for example, where at some point in time in the future, we can have all the data accessible for all of our locations and all media, and then that can be readily available out on the website, because we think that is something that would be nice to share more readily rather than having it all piecemeal.
Yeah. The other thing I'll mention here, in case, just so everybody here knows, is that under our Michigan/Eagle website, there is an inventory of facilities for all of our, what we call Part 201 facilities in our remediation and redevelopment world. And so in that inventory of facilities, which is just being launched, I think, this week, there's going to be a way for you to look up sites and see what's out there. And so that might be another opportunity for you to gather data outside. Again, you'll have, I think there's going to be a way to see who the project manager is, so you can, if you need to contact them, again, using that platform as well. But yeah, it's not going to be perfect. You're not going to have a ton of data on every single site, but we're going to get you the best data that we have for the most important and the sites that are affecting the most residents, or affecting have potentially threatened drinking water wells.
All right. Well, Abby, thank you very much. Good job. I think we all got a pretty good handle now on where this could be headed. And like you mentioned, we'll get the feel from the rest of the MPART members on moving this forward. And if all goes as planned, we could start adopting this new structure in March, right?
Yep. I think it will definitely help.
All right.
And thanks for letting me come tonight.
You bet. Good job. Thank you. All right. Well, let's move on next to the agenda on another representative from Remediation and Redevelopment Division, Josh Mosier, the Assistant Director there, to answer any questions you might have on the Part 201 groundwater cleanup criteria, those other 5, and what that process is doing. So, Josh, I'll hand it over to you for a quick update.
Okay, thanks, Steve, and hello, everybody. So yeah, the other 5, that's what I call them as well, the other 5. So last time I was here, that was back in November, and I think we were just in between our information sessions that we were given to the public to explain the process. So just a little bit of history in our timeline. So, we had PFOA and PFAS criteria established at the 70 parts per trillion individually and combined back in January of 2018. And since then, with the promulgation of the state drinking water standards, or MCLs, in August of 2020, the law did a couple things. One thing that it did is it allowed us to directly replace the PFOA and PFAS numbers with the MCLs. So those criteria changed automatically. And then it allows us to establish new groundwater cleanup criteria for the other 5 PFAS. So we did that as well. So we did that again, we had a couple information sessions in November to talk about the process, the law requirements. We walked people through that, and then we actually published and established the groundwater cleanup criteria under Part 201 based on the MCLs in December 21st to be exact, of 20. And so, as Abby was saying, and everybody was saying, we have 7 groundwater cleanup criteria for those PFAS, including PFOA and PFAS, and the other 5. So those are all established. They're all enforceable under the law. However, the law for those other 5 where we previously did not have cleanup criteria in our rules and established, we had to initiate the rulemaking process. So while PFOA and PFAS are established and they're established by statute, these other 5 are on a separate track, kind of. The law allowed us to establish them. They are enforceable, but the statute also said we have to initiate the rulemaking process to get them promulgated. So we did that. We submitted the request for rulemaking in January, and it was approved by the Michigan Office of Administrative Hearings and Rules on the 15th of January. That request for rulemaking went to the Environmental Rules Review Committee at the same time, so they're aware of what's coming down the pipe, because these rules have to go through that committee as well. And so that's where we're at currently. The next step is to submit proposed rules. And so we would submit the proposed rules for these other 5 PFAS to solidify those criteria into our promulgated rules and criteria tables. Also with that is what's called a regulatory impact statement. That's part of the rule package, where we describe why we did, how it impacts, what the impact is to other law, other standards, costs, businesses, things of that nature, and an executive overview of what we're doing. So that we are proposing to have done by the end of the month, early March, so it can get in front of the Environmental Rules Committee for their mid-March meeting. And then from there, they have their process, and it's a 35-day process to take a first look at them, determine if we have the authority to actually promulgate these rules or other issues, and then they can either decide to review them, and we would probably go and discuss it with them at a meeting or two, give a presentation, or they could decide that, that they're going to skip this process and have them move on to the normal public comment and hearing process before they go to the legislature. So it's kind of a brief overview of where we're at. Again, we look to move our proposed rules later this month or beginning of March and get them into that to the hands of the Environmental Rules Committee in March. Any questions? Oh, I think I do have hands here. Like AJ.
Just 2 really quick questions, and thanks, Jess, for the update. My understanding is, yes, as of December 21st, these actually become enforceable rules. There's a period of time that all this other rulemaking needs to be complete by before they then become not applicable rules. Is that right? Do we have like a year, or is there a time frame associated with that, so that there's delays with JCAR or ERRC, it could put at risk these 5 others?
The 201 statute's not clear. It just says that we have to initiate the rulemaking process within 30 days, and we did that. And so the outcome, so these are enforceable criteria all the way through that process. And depending on how the process ends dictates whether these survive. So if there's delays and we don't make it through the whole process, and the rules go stale or we have to withdraw them, I don't know that it affects the ones that are established. But if we go through the process and the legislature determines that it was unlawful, or they, do what they can do to remove our authority, because there's a lot of stuff that can happen through the Administrative Procedures Act that can change them. But, they survive through the process. And until the process ends and that outcome is dictated by the process, they're enforceable all the way through the process.
Okay, so it's not a situation where we're bumping up against a 4-month deadline and we should.
No.
Excellent.
Nope.
Okay. And my other it's really more of a comment. When we were in the process of the MCLs, I forget who it was, maybe Steve, we had a vote within the COG to support those MCLs, and assuming there's a similar willingness amongst the COG to support these Part 201 standards, I'd like to request that maybe we can have a vote on that and have that brought to ERC, maybe JCAR, to let them know that we strongly support them if in fact that's the view of the COG.
Well, I would say any community support would be appreciated.
Yeah, we can stay in touch with Josh on whatever appropriate timing for something like that might be. Absolutely. Okay. Any other questions for Josh? All right. Well, good job, Josh. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Okay, my pleasure.
And let's move on then. Next slide, which is, I think, just the COG subcommittee updates. And so let's go to the Engaging Public Subcommittee. Ken, go ahead and provide your update.
Yeah, I'll be really brief. We had a really good meeting tonight. We've been on the other meetings with AJ working on the website. And I think our takeaway tonight was we have to work on, or we're working with community health on risk messaging. So with that said, more to follow. Any questions?
All right, Ken. Hearing none, let's move on to then, thank you for that, AJ and the Web Review Subcommittee.
Well, I think we've spent a good chunk of our time already talking about that. So I don't have really anything else to add unless anyone else has some questions about that. But I think we had a really fruitful discussion about what is, involved several meetings with the subcommittee on getting the website updated. So thanks again to MPART, Eagle, DHHS staff for working through all that with us.
All right. Thank you, AJ. Any other questions for AJ? All right. Good work for both subcommittees over the past month, especially, and helping us get that decision tree, so to speak, not decision tree, but the web information and how we're going to actually start putting that out there. Really appreciate that. All right, so now we have an opportunity for community round robin. Any of the members, if you have anything to share for the good of the group, I want to give you some time to do that. And all you got to do is raise your hand and jump in. If we have anything in particular. If not, that's okay. All right.
Looks like Stacy Taylor.
Okay, I can't see your hand, but Stacy, go ahead.
Hi, folks. Like I said, we're up right here in Holly, and we've been about 3.5 years on our investigation on this. The dump was not documented or revealed to the people that live in the community. The documents were all lost. So we also got roped into a thing where we have a manufactured home committee that is getting ready to expand directly east of this dump. And so there's going to be 192 people that are families that are going to be living adjacent to this dump. There is a community one, class one well that is less than 2,000 feet from the site. So that's going to exacerbate it. It's been an absolute disaster what's happening right here in Holly. And like I said, there, according to the health department, 100,000 people are at risk. But I have to say I'm grateful to have these people here talking right now that are actually dealing with the situation, but ours is a preventable situation to some amount of degree, including the fact that the runoff is going to be crossing the dump and those waters are going to be carried into the community across our land, across up into the chain of lakes. And there's a lot of water up here in Holly. And so I'm just saying that straight up that, you know, after 3.5 years, I'm grateful to hear that there's other people out there that are working together. I grew up in Grayling, Lake Marguerite. We obviously know what's happening up there. My brother's in Rockford. We know what happened there. So I know it happens, but I am grateful that there's people working together to get this right.
Thanks, Stacy. All right, anybody else? Okay, well, let's move on then. Next slide. Oh, Dan, I see Dan there. Go ahead, Dan, sorry.
Yeah, I'll be real quick. We've been hearing a lot of interest in the update around Willow Run in the Huron watershed. Continued interest, as Bob brought up earlier, about the Brighton sites and the contamination up there. So a lot of interest in those communities in particular. More broadly, I've been getting a lot of questions about fishing as folks are heading out to ice fish and do that kind of thing. So there's a lot of interest in guidance for PFAS and fish. We've gotten a few people talking about wanting PFAS in the Eat Safe Fish guidelines for the Huron River. I'll stop there. Those are the updates for now.
That's good. No, thanks for that.
Patty Baldwin.
Hi there. I just want to thank Abby Hendershot and Aaron Asman and other folks with our township who've been helping out with the Cascade Township area of interest. Progress is being made, and we're looking forward to hearing news about a grant that was submitted for water for the neighborhood. So I just wanted to let folks know that on behalf of the neighborhood, a big thank you on the progress that's being made.
Thanks for mentioning that, Patty.
Thank you, Patty.
All right.
We have Tony.
Yes, I have a question. I read a newspaper account about the situation up in Grand Traverse County, and I understand that I don't know, there's a number of wells up there that homes up there that are getting temporary water supply now, and that Eagle was able to pitch in along with some others to help folks to connect to the municipal water line. I think that will work. We have a similar situation in Oscoda where there is a municipal water line for people to hook into, but a lot of people can't afford it. And we don't really have any help on the hookups. And I'm wondering if somebody, whoever the right person is, could get in touch with, some of us in Oscoda to see if that same program might be available. And I don't expect an answer tonight, but that's a question.
And no, and that's a very reasonable question to ask. And some of the stars lined up, so to speak, for East Bay Township. I think that's what you're referring to, with some emergency money that RRD had available that was pulled away from another project that didn't go forward. But if that had not been available, they were going to apply for those C2R2 grants as well. Do you know if anybody applied for the C2R2 grants from Oscoda?
I don't believe that happened. But Steve, I don't know for sure. That'd be a question for probably the township would have done that, and we just have to ask them.
Yeah, but no, I mean, and that's a need. You've heard the governor mention the need for infrastructure improvements in Michigan, and I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg with some of these longer term solutions. So, point well made.
And Steve, I know in some cases where if the township doesn't own the system, it would have to be the water system who is providing the water that applied for that grant. So maybe they partnered with somebody else.
Ah.
I don't know what the exact situation is. I know that was the situation that Patty was just talking about for Cascade. Because Cascade Township doesn't own the lines, Grand Rapids does. So they partnered, Grand Rapids submitted it, but it was for the Cascade Township. So I know that they did that. So it looks like Mike Jerry probably has some stuff to add in.
Right. People need to remember that unfortunately, the way the laws are written, that the ability to serve charge, which usually is the largest charge, is a charge that we, the state, are not able to help out with. And with Amy's hand up, Amy Peterson, I'll let her go ahead and expound a little further on that.
Actually, thanks, Mike. Yeah, I was just going to say that Oscoda Charter Township did apply for infrastructure grants for a total of $5 million. So they did apply for that.
Good.
Does that cover what we have in this particular project that I'm talking about? The water line has been extended with a federal grant, but the hookup, there are 144 homes. The running of the lines from the homes to the main that runs out in front of the main line that runs in front of the houses. I think the last I had heard there were 144 homes and something like 10 or 12 had actually paid to hook up to the municipal water. I think that cost, which it's a few $1,000s, is stopping people from doing that.
Right. So once again, the hookup from the home to the water line is an acceptable grant charge. So something that could be done if that was selected under the grant program. However, the ability to serve charge, which is a charge that either the township, the water authority, whatever puts on, that is not eligible for any kind of a grant program. So there would be the ability, if selected, to pay for the line from the water main to the house. But once again, that ability to serve charge is not something that we're allowed to pay for. So that is an issue in East Bay Township that was taken care of by the county, and a couple other sources picked up that cost. Otherwise, you're looking at the township or whoever putting in a 20-year project where the person would pay X amount of dollars per year for $20 or 20 years, I'm sorry. But unfortunately, we do not have the ability to pick up that part of the cost. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yep, it does. Thanks, Mike.
Bob Delaney.
Yeah, thanks. Somewhat switching, sort of the same topic, but switching. I'll say this for Steve Sliver, because I'm sure he'd say this to all of you, that if MD or Eagle had a limitless pot of money, they had to go fix all these places right away as fast as they could. But that's not the situation you guys are in. And I was wondering, what is the outlook for funding for the cleanup program? With everything going on in the COVID, this can lose legislators, elected officials' attention. So, what's happening with cleanup dollars?
Well, I'll just jump in as our cleanup dollars for this year are already set, and we're just now in the throes of budget for the 21-22 fiscal year. And I don't know that there's any dollars in jeopardy. I think the constant cry is there's not enough to get to things as quickly as we'd like to, and that's just kind of the reality of the world we're in. But even just with the C2R2 grants, that was limited to $25 million, and for either addressing contamination or consolidation of public water supplies. And hopefully that helps inform our policymakers as well on, you know, the need. I'm pretty sure there's going to be more requests than what we have funding for. And so, you know, going forward, you know, we've got all of the sites. We're continuing to develop new information there, as well as a lot of requests from communities. So, you know, fingers crossed, obviously, but we're not hearing that there's going to be anything in jeopardy. It's just whether we can get additional resources. And so that's part of that budget process that has just now gotten underway.
Thanks.
Yep, no, thank you as well. All right, Mike Jury, is your hand still up from before?
Should be down.
And now it is.
We have Brandy.
Hey, Brandy.
Hi. My question was kind of about funding too. I just read in the news today that PFAS exposure at Harvard did a study that said that the severe COVID risk of having a severe COVID case is like five times. You know, it increases the risk fivefold, and it also, if having PFAS contaminated blood can make you resistant to the vaccine. So I was wondering if CDC does partner with Michigan and Department of Human Health and Services for funding. So I was wondering if we could get them to work with MPART and getting funding to make sure that, you know, just for more testing, because I just feel like we need to make sure that all of these, like I've said before, that every single county and well and public water supply is tested on a regular basis for PFAS contamination, but also the residents that are living in PFAS contaminated cities and counties, that there's some way that we can get our blood tested to see how high our levels of PFAS are in our blood, to see if we are going to be resistant to a vaccine and if we are at a higher risk of getting severe COVID.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your point there. And I see Marcus is on from DHHS. I don't know if you want to just chime in on that, or someone else from DHHS.
Yeah, I can take that, Steve. That's actually a really good question. The COVID vaccine is so new. We don't have any data that shows what the COVID vaccine or what the immune response is with the COVID vaccine to individuals that have PFAS exposure. The study that they're referring to in the article was based on other vaccine exposures. And what they've shown is that even though your immune response is not the same, you're still seeing the same protection against the disease in those other vaccines. And so with that said, the CDC and DHHS is following the CDC guidance as it is saying that there's no need to think you might need an accelerated booster series with the COVID vaccine. As of right now, it's just too new to have any real data on it, but based on the previous data, and this is the one that was quoted in that article, it shows that you don't need to follow any different set of vaccines. So I do want to point that out, that so people don't see that in the news and get all worried and scared right now. You know, we're still holding true that get your 2 doses.
All right. Thank you.
Can I ask him one more question?
Certainly.
In that, but I was just wondering if there's a way that we could get funding from the CDC and MDHSS for like testing the blood of residents to see what their PFAS exposure is, especially if they're a known city or county that has PFAS contamination. Especially, I think we got a list, like, I don't know, a couple of months ago, Steve, like we got emailed that list of contaminated landfills, high priority, medium priority, low priority. And I think that is a good indicator of, you know, how the PFAS contamination, you know, just from those landfills. And I know Kalamazoo County was high priority in all their landfills. So obviously we have a lot of PFAS probably. And I just was wondering if there was a way that we can get funding through CDC or Department of Health for testing the blood of residents for PFAS. I just think it's really important.
I'm back, by the way. So,
There you are.
somebody's bugging my, they didn't want to hear what I was about to say. Sorry about that. Anyway, so I guess what I was saying is that data is based on other vaccines. Hold true, follow the CDC recommendation. If it's a 2-dose vaccine, get your second dose. If it's a 1-dose vaccine, which I don't know if that's even rolled out yet in the United States, just follow the protocol on that. And Brandy, you said something else that was important. Oh, the extent of the response, how you show it, how serious COVID-19 is. We're actually looking at that data too. We have the publication. Looks like it's PFBA, I think, was the one that showed an association. And they had the data. The data was, you had to look hard to see that association. There was actually some other ones, PHFX, HXFS, that showed actually a slight protective effect against COVID. So again, not to worry people when they see that article or anything. We're looking into it. As of right now, it looks like they're just small influences, if anything. But we are looking into the possibility of actually looking at COVID-19 vaccine response in PFAS affected individuals. So we're just scratching the surface and seeing if that's something we can do, because that's going to be an important thing. I wish I had more concrete stuff. It's just such a new vaccine that we don't have the scientific data on it yet.
Right. For the vaccine stuff, I understand, but I was just saying, like, just like take the vaccine part away from it and just say, is there a way that we can get funding from the CDC or from your department towards MPART or whatever, just working together so that the residents that live near PFAS contaminated communities can have their blood tested to see their levels of PFAS in their blood. I feel like that's being missed a lot. Like, people are not really getting tested for their blood tested to see what their levels are. And I just think that I also told Steve it's important for, when we get tested, the communities are tested for PFAS contamination, that the residents are notified right away so that they know, if they need to move away or whatever they can do to protect their health from being exposed to these PFAS. So I'm just wondering about funding. Like, what can we do? Is there anything we can do just as a group too should we do a GoFundMe? Like, what do we do to try to get money raised to protect the health of everyone better?
That's a good point, good question. And I think just being mindful of time, though, want to keep moving on here before we start losing people. But no, I appreciate the issue, and it's good to hear, Marcus, that DHHS is looking at potential effects. And Brandy, if you want to chat a little bit more offline, perhaps it can, maybe give Marcus a call or something on that.
Yeah, Brandy, I definitely welcome that too. There's a lot of unknowns in what it means to find PFAS in blood, and yeah, let's talk offline. I would be more than willing to have a conversation. So.
All right. Thank you. And again, I'm having a hard time seeing if anybody's got their hand raised. My Teams is not cooperating. So Kelly, how are we doing on any other folks chiming in?
Bob Pataki has his hand raised.
Okay. Bob?
I really don't. I don't know how to turn it off. That's all. But I was wondering whether or not Holly, Michigan is still taking dump materials out of the city of Toronto.
Oh.
I have never heard that. I know that we have a lot of early industry here. I know we're local to a lot of secondary suppliers for the big three. I know I've read documents that suggest the government was dumping in our dump. We know that there's 3 dumps that were of major concern. In fact, Governor Milliken was looking at all of them back in the 70s. And one of them was a major site over in Rose Township with 5,000 barrels. Toronto, nope, that's a new one to me.
Well, basically, I know Senator Stabenow got a reduction in the volume, and there were at one point, several hundred truckloads per day coming out of Toronto's garbage and being disposed of in that area. So I don't know if it's exactly a dump you're involved with, but I just wondered.
No, that would be something different, though. But yeah, that's the import of Canadian trash issue. Yeah.
Well, I was thinking it might have PFAS too. You never know.
Yeah, no, exactly. A good question, though.
Sorry,
And there's
take care.
probably PFAS in some of that trash too.
Yeah.
All right, well, folks, Kelly, is there anybody else that has their hand raised?
Ken Harvey.
Okay, Ken?
Yeah, just to follow up on a discussion of the health studies, we shared this at our committee meeting, but the Michigan PFAS exposure health study and the ATSDR multi-site study are taking place in the following communities: Belmont, Rockford, Parchment, and Cooper Townships. And this was a flyer that I picked up in Rockford when I picked up my pizza tonight. So they're canvassing the area, letting people know to get involved, get tested for these health studies. So hope that helps with that question about the blood sample.
Gotcha. Thanks, Ken. And Kelly tells me that Tony has his hand raised.
Thanks, Steve. I just, following up on that discussion about the vaccines, this is, I want to raise this because it's an issue that we in impacted communities face almost all the time when sort of safety standards and issues about, well, what's safe and what should we do come up. And this is in no way a criticism at this point of the state, but in the past we have seen, I mean, very simply, if it's 70 parts per trillion or less with PFOA and PFOS, you're fine. Well, now we've done some more research and that's not necessarily true.
Right.
And understand that the science doesn't always catch up. It takes it a while to catch up with the facts. But for those of us who were drinking 70 in between 0 and 70, it didn't become unsafe when the science caught up to it. And I just want to note that in the article about Professor Grandjean, he said, and this is Professor Grandjean, it's not the CDC, but he said that people exposed to PFAS should potentially get 3 doses of COVID-19 vaccines to protect themselves as best as possible. I throw that out there and not to, again, not to raise alarm, but to just raise a fact. And there may be differences of opinions, but for those of us in these communities and who face these heavy exposures, we're kind of in the wild west of frontier land. And I think, I always try to play it more on the side of caution, but that's my feeling about risk. But I just want to throw that out there because that is circulating.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Tony. And good news, bad news. We're, from what I read, we're going to be in this pandemic for a while, and perhaps we could have an agenda item to have a conversation about this within the COG in the coming months as well, to get, dive a little deeper, because maybe we'll have some more information. I hate to put Marcus on the spot, but perhaps that might be something that we could do here on an agenda in March or April. All right. Okay. Now I can't see any more hands raised, but again, my Teams is not functioning, but I think we could probably move on unless, Kelly, you see somebody else?
Nobody else.
Right. MPART updates, and then the next slide is just real quick highlight the fact we have 2 more sites since you guys met last time, and there's the write-ups are out there on the web. But both Northside and Willow Run Airport, and this just highlights the facts that we've done some local briefings, and one has some residential well investigations, the other one does not. And next slide, quick here is just to highlight the fact that myself and Marcus and then Pam McQueer did a presentation, Michigan's PFAS response to the Institute for Journalism and Natural Resources, their PFAS workshop back on the 28th, went really well. Pam did awesome. I don't think she's on here tonight because she's got some other things going, but anyway, it was a great opportunity to share with those journalists what's going on here in Michigan, and I know several others of you have talked with that group in the past. Also, that we've done some outreach to the tribes in a very deliberate way with their environmental, natural resources, and health folks back on the 29th. And they do want to stay connected with MPART, and so we're pursuing different ways to do that. So that was good news, and made sure that they understood the resources that are available from the MPART agencies should they choose to take advantage of those. So next slide, please. And real quick, if there were any MPART agency updates, I know we've got a lot of folks from our team on here. And so any of the agency reps have any other updates for the good of the group? I know it's running kind of late, but we'll make time for that if you have any. All right.
I guess, Steve, let me just chime in real quick. I think Ken already said it. If you're in the Belmont, Rockford, or Parchment Cooper area, please look at the website I put in the chat, or visit michigan.gov DEH bio. We are still recruiting those two areas for the health studies. So the more people that are willing to participate, the more strong our study is going to be. So take a look at that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus. Appreciate it. All right. Well, I think at this point, unless there's any other agency updates coming up in March, Sandy's going to update us on the EPA training. Tammy is going to talk to us a little bit about those ecological studies that everybody's interested in. And Ian will talk a little bit more about public water supply monitoring data and how that's being managed. So all good looking forward to those. And so I think at this point in time, it's probably a good idea to let you all go. We kept you a few minutes over, but very good conversation. And I do really appreciate the dialogue here tonight and look forward to talking with you all no later than this time next month. Have a good night, everybody.